Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Raftery and I'm a director with Projects RH based in Sydney. Today I'm joined by David Dwyer of Dwyer and Associates, CPAs of Jimboomba, Queensland. Our topic is Australia's construction-ready projects will drive investment. Welcome, David.
Hi, Paul, and good evening to all the listeners.
Tonight, David will give an overview and we will discuss what we see as the key questions. David.
Thanks, Paul. The Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, on budget night, 6th of October, backed two forms of construction to help drive the Australian economy. The first was to support additional housing construction, and the second was infrastructure. And we'll deal with both of those as we go through our podcast. Home ownership in Australia has been almost an article of faith since the Second World War. The growth in suburbs in most major cities in the 1950s and beyond is testimony to a commitment of both sides of politics to develop home ownership as being one of the pillars of society. So over the last 2 decades, the affordability of homes has declined. So it's no surprise that a job-creating budget was going to be addressed. The housing industry will also be a major area where apprentices can learn their craft before moving into other industries. In the budget last week, the apprenticeships were given an incentive, or the employers, to employ apprentices 50%, and there was job maker incentives there as well. In addition to that, there were home builder grants of $25,000 for projects anywhere over 150 up to 750,000. It sort of shows that the building industry is very, very strong in the development and recovery. It's interesting that our population has been declining, but it's only seemed to be a short-term issue as we're looking to the long-term destiny is to sort of get more people in through migration. The second major construction assignment is to build more infrastructure projects. Most developed countries have a pipeline of infrastructure projects which they need to be built. The shopping list usually includes things such as roads and rail, airports, export facilities, bridges, universities, schools, hospitals, military bases, and that list continues. So while many of these fall within the states, they won't occur unless the government or the federal government has direct or indirect substantial involvement in them. So the Treasurer's speech laid down the foundations. In most areas, the Commonwealth is committing to a rolling 10-year program of infrastructure which needs to be balanced between the states and territories and the sometimes conflicting demands of the community. Most people want better roads, aged care, hospitals and schools. States and territories generally have an array of projects which need to be funded that are considered construction ready. So there are a number of terms that basically people are looking for the projects with all the necessary for construction can start virtually after mobilisation orders given. So the current pipeline of activities employs about 100,000 people, with the measures announced immediately adding another 40,000 to that number to be employed. So the government's had to invest another $14 billion in that. So what was significant was that the funding is going to be provided on a use it or lose it basis. So the states and territories normally update their shopping list and present it to the government, to Canberra, before the budget gets done. So Paul, do you really think the idea of use it or lose it is fair, or whether it works?
Well, David, I think the real issue is the government wants jobs created quickly, and all these projects are supposed to be complete with all the pre-approvals they should have, so they're ready to go. If a state or territory says we're not, or we want to change the priorities, I think it's quite open to the Commonwealth to say, well, sorry, we're going to go to somebody who wants those jobs and get on with it.
Interesting. But, I mean, one of the great concerns is that, with the building rush within the states, they'll become more concerned with the outcomes rather than the cost, particularly when they're spending Canberra's money.
Look, that's always a problem, David. I think you and I both remember the pink VATS issue that was associated with the global financial crisis recovery.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, classically, construction companies are invited to tender on a fixed price turnkey basis. But in practice, that means they start looking for variations because they want to get their margins up. I suspect a better approach would be to look at an alliance contract which would allow the parties to explore outcomes which would result in a win-win solution. The second way to look at this is that construction is only part of the cost of the project. Most of these projects will need to be operated for many years, whether they are roads, airports, prisons, hospitals. Most of these projects have huge service components to them which need to be delivered over the life of the project. So really, what's important is they're designed to allow minimum costs in the long term. So many of the roads and other projects that have been built in the last decade have been done as public-private partnerships. And in this model, the private sector funds the development and the public sector provides at least some of the revenue. An example of this is toll roads. A private operator may want the toll road not to operate between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., say on a Sunday. What the government says is, we want the road open, so we're going to have a community service obligation, and we're going to pay you to do this. So globally, governments have been able to use their ongoing payment mechanism to say that they want something to happen. The classic example must be buses. Governments do want buses to start on Sundays at 5 a.m. and operators constantly say, well, that's not feasible. So they pay them a subsidy for doing what they want. I think today that we have the models around the world on how to deliver these projects. So I think there's a huge opportunity to look overseas as well as at home for how to deliver. David, do you believe we're really at the right time in the cycle to invest in infrastructure?
Well, I think now's a really good time because the Australian government still has its AAA credit rating and the ability to borrow funds for more than 10 years at a rate of about 1% per annum. So it's probably the best opportunity for borrowing and developing projects on a financial basis that's occurred in the last 50 years. So the classic reason for not wanting to develop such infrastructure is it'll crowd others out of doing development, such as private contractors and that. But in the current economic circumstances, the proposed infrastructure projects will stimulate the broader economy and are not likely to crowd out anybody in the private sector. So now is an ideal time in the economic cycle for the government to be building necessary infrastructure. So, Paul, how will these projects or the government infrastructure projects drive other investments?
Well, what I think does create just general demand, David. The major projects will need concrete suppliers and brick suppliers. They'll need trucks and buses, and those people will take salary packages home and they'll go down to the local shop and buy sausage rolls and meat pies. But and then the sausage roll and meat pie person will buy a new oven. So, and they will have that serviced by yet another small business. So this is the multiplier effect.
Yeah, mate, I remember the multiplier effect from Economics 101 many, many years ago, but what exactly is the multiplier effect?
What it says is when you create one job, and it's a real job that people go out and buy other services from, you probably create 6 to 7 jobs across the economy. So what the government is trying to do at the moment is create 950,000 new jobs. That's their game. So what they're doing is saying, well, if we create 500,000 jobs, the rest will come. And I think that's really what it's about.
Yeah,
David, you work with businesses. How quickly do you think these jobs can be created?
Well, Paul, major projects do take some time to mobilise. We're talking about projects which are construction ready. So they'll generally have, parties that are already pre-qualified to undertake the project. So when we see substantial progress in getting these projects mobilised before March 2021, let's face it, between you and me, we'd probably like to see it in November 20, but I don't think that's realistic. But I also think November 21 is also too far away. So we see a quick response to the availability of money to build things like rural roads and services, and there are lots of smaller projects that are very important locally.
So, David, do we need to wait for the mega projects?
No, definitely not. I mean, there are many projects which have been stalled only for want of the monies. So therefore, the parties have agreed to the tender terms, mostly on a unit rate basis, and many of these could be operational within about 6 weeks. So most of these projects are in the regional areas where they can be, done and built rapidly. So there are many roads in regional Australia which could be supported by regional engineering groups. Likewise, there are many school projects and hospital projects which would similarly be done on a unit rate basis. So I suspect even many of the infrastructure projects which have been spoken about are more about roads and bridges and the like. Pre-qualified tenderers will help speed up that process, of course. So, Paul, does infrastructure fit into something bigger?
Well, David, I think it does. The key question is, can it be made to do so? And I think that the package together will create jobs. It needs to be seen in light of the number of subsidies that are there. The first for those under 30 and additionally something smaller for those under 35. But even the direct apprenticeship scheme is going to create 50,000 new jobs. So there's lots of things happening in unison. And I'm very impressed by the desire to see the STEM areas focused on. So that's science, technology, engineering and mathematics. So each of these, whether you're saying you're developing apprenticeships or you're developing engineering projects, are supporting a unified concept that we need to have a smarter workforce. So I think the budget does bring the bits together, and it will help turn the economy into a new direction. So thanks, David. So, look, in summary, I think what we have heard from the package is consistent with the rest of the 2020 budget. It will assist in the creation of jobs and generally stimulate the economy. It's complemented by the Gifted Independent Talent Visa Program and by the Entrepreneurial and Investment Visa programs. As such, we believe that Australia's construction projects will drive more investment and continue to create jobs into the future. Thank you, David, for being with me today.
My pleasure, Paul, and thank you to listeners.
I'm Paul Raftery. I'm a director with Projects RH in Sydney, and today I have been joined by David Dwyer of Dwyer & Associates CPAs of Jimboomba, Queensland. Good night, David.
Good night, Paul.
Thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now.